like after 18 years of recovery, having overcome addiction, having learned how to have reciprocal relationships, being, rooted in friendships where I'm seen and known, but also where people can tell me the truth and we love each other hard and we love each other well. And I think looking around, I just thought, man, look at us. We are pushing so much of our anxiety and anger and fear out. And we're pushing it in these online places. And we are saying things in the comment section we would never say in real life. And we are closing off anybody who doesn't think like us, look like us, vote like us, or live like us. And this is not how it should be.
Hey guys, it's Melissa Moore. Thanks for joining me on today's episode of Faith, Hope, Love, where we grow together in our faith, increase in hope, and learn how to better love God and love other people. On today's episode, we are nearing the end of our Momentum series, and I'm so excited. Thank you guys for sticking with me through that and how we have been able to learn what it looks like to run our race well and love others with the love of Jesus. So today we are joined by Ashley Abercrombie, and she is the author of Love is the Resistance. And so before we jump in, I just want to encourage you, whether we're talking about politics. I know that that's a heavy and sticky topic. And so I want to encourage you, wherever you find yourself on the political spectrum, whether you're on the left, the right, or in the middle, I encourage you just to come into this conversation with open ears and open hearts. So Ashley, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. If you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we jump into your book.
I'd love to. Thank you so much again for having me. And I'm really excited to be with you all today. So I live in sunny California in Los Angeles. I love it here. I was born and raised in the Southeast in North Carolina, for those who are listening in the States, and loved being born and raised there. I lived there until I was 21 years old before I moved out to California. And that's where I met my husband. We had our first baby there. Then we spent 4 years in New York where I had our second baby. And then we relocated back to Southern California because we just needed more margin in basically every area of our life living in Manhattan. And we came back to SoCal 2 weeks before COVID hit. And then I had a pandemic baby, and she's precious. She's about to turn 1. So that's like my personal home life. And, I write, I speak. I've been writing for a very long time before anyone was ever wanting to read anything I was writing, because it is my deepest passion. I love to do it and love to help communicate stories. I love to speak through personal narrative because I know I've gone through so much, just like the rest of you who are watching or listening. We've all been through a lot, and every person has issues, problems, and pain. And I appreciate helping people understand what's happening to them and normalizing their lived experience and helping people grow together in relationship and helping folks get along when they disagree. And so those are some of my passions. And again, I'm really glad to be here with you.
And I just want to say, I love just reading your book. I feel like the last couple of years have been so highly charged, especially around topics of justice and politics. I mean, there's so much that's happened that I feel like your book really comes at a very perfect time. It's very crucial that we take the time to discuss this and process everything that has happened. And I think that your book does a good job of opening the door to conversations like this in a way that is gentle and kind, but also direct. And I feel like that's something that we all really need. So before we kind of talk about some of the content of conflict resolution, what was it specifically with your book that really inspired you to write this? Why did you feel called to talk about this topic?
Okay, well, a little bit of background. So I, spent a lot of my life, I like to say that I had a PhD in performing. Like I was just like a master pretender, and I was always the strong one, the person that people came to for advice, but I also didn't know how to put my mask down and say that I have needs. I didn't know what real reciprocity looked like. And it made me a bad friend, frankly, because who wants to be friends with a perfect person who never has a need and never has a problem and never is able to be vulnerable or intimate? But the truth is, I wasn't raised like that. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't have the basic skills and capacity to do that. And I feel like so many of us are hindered in our relationships because we either are not speaking up or we've been taught to be really aggressive or passive aggressive to get our way. So we manipulate or we control. And so I've always kind of had this fascination with overcoming my own pretenses and learning to walk in humility instead of pride and learning how to have the basic relationship skills that I need to communicate. And then in the last, 5 or 6 years, I've really looked around and been like, man, we are not good at conflict. Like, look at us in the comments sections. Like, God in heaven isn't watching and reading what we're writing. What are we out here in these streets doing? And I just felt like after 18 years of recovery, having overcome addiction, having learned how to have reciprocal relationships, being, rooted in friendships where I'm seen and known, but also where people can tell me the truth. I do not have an echo chamber around me in my real life. And I do not have a bunch of yes people in my real life. They will call me to the carpet and they give me the privilege of doing the same. And we love each other hard and we love each other well. And I think looking around, I just thought, man, look at us. We are pushing so much of our anxiety and anger and fear out. And we're pushing it in these online places. And we are saying things in the comment section we would never say in real life. And we are closing off anybody who doesn't think like us, look like us, vote like us, or live like us. And this is not how it should be. You can't do that at your job. You can't do that in your faith community. You can't do that on the neighborhood block that you live on. And so I wanted to really help people better understand the reasons that we fight. I think a lot of times my husband and I do a lot of premarital counseling for people. And, in premarital, you talk a lot about the economic class that you grew up in, for example. And you do that because if you have one partner who is terrified to ever spend any money, they always marry a person who's like, there's always enough. I shall buy whatever I want. And there's conflict, right? Because one always had a lot and one always had a little. So you talk about something like class, even though you might not specifically name it that. You talk about ethnicity. Where somebody came from, what's their cultural upbringing, what's their family of origin? Did they grow up in a 2-parent household? Did they grow up in a single parent household? Did they come up in the foster care system? Like, what was their family of origin experience like? What is their education story? Do they have a faith community they were a part of? What are their political beliefs? And you talk about all this in premarital because these are the things that people fight about. And what I realize is that we don't talk about this in our friendships enough. And we don't talk about this in our faith communities enough. And we don't talk about, this issue in our neighborhoods enough, or in the schools that our kids are a part of enough. We don't talk about that because everybody is so afraid. And so instead we just fight each other and bark at each other or ignore issues. And so I have a real passion to help people understand why we fight, what our cultural issues are, naming things and helping discover what's pride and what's humble and what's love and what's not, so that's part of what stirred in me. I know that was a very long-winded answer to your question, but that's part of all of these things together inspired me to write this book.
I love it. And I resonate with so much of what you said, like sharing about recovery, like that's a big part of my journey. And I know I'm hoping that people out there, if you've not gone through a recovery program, if you need it, there's nothing wrong with that. We've talked a lot about it in previous episodes, but I love what you're saying about this idea that like as humans, it's kind of more comfortable just to go with the flow and, spend time with people that like agree with us. And I think that happens in just general society, but also within the church, that it's kind of like you find a church that agrees with what you agree with. And I do this too. So it's comfortable. Right. But I think like the thing that really just breaks my heart is that, we all have different opinions, even within the church. And we need to have conversations where we come together and talk with people that we disagree with, find common ground. And I think that's something that you lead so well in your book is how to have those kinds of conversations. So with that, a big thing you talk about in the book is what it looks like to love others with the love of Jesus. And this idea that if we do love God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, it kind of makes it easier to do that. But we still, like you mentioned, like we see people that are, fighting within families. We see bickering and just like hard-heartedness in the comment sections and just being mean to people in our communities and on, our neighbors. If we're seeing that in ourselves, there's something up. So I wanted to kind of get your feedback. What does that look like for you? How do we change our hearts if they are not showing the love of Jesus?
Totally. I think a caveat here I'd love to share is just that I didn't grow up in an evangelical home. And I was raised, the only other Christian in my family who went to church at the time was my great Aunt Very, and I went with her on Sundays. And that was a church filled with people who were in poverty and elderly people. And so I think because of that, there was no rhetoric from the front. Not that this can happen in any type of church, of course it can, but in our church, there was no rhetoric around who you should vote for and how you should think about social issues. It was literally just helping people survive their life by giving them the Bible, by giving them faith, by teaching them how to follow Jesus. And I think because of that, I was very surprised, as a woman in my early 30s to learn that there is so much enmeshment from the pulpit to the politics. And that felt like whoa, how do we do this? And I was also raised in a home where my parents were in different political parties. And, they very often disagreed about politics. And it was a normal conversation for us. There was civil discourse and conversations and discussions. And our relationships with one another were not at risk if we didn't believe the same things, or if we voted differently, or if we thought about an issue differently. And so for me, it was always like, hey, yeah, of course we disagree, but we're family and we love each other and we're going to have these conversations, and look at us disagreeing. Oh, well, and so I just was surprised to see Christians do this so terribly. I do think that there is a social media element here, and having news accessed at our fingertips all the time. And very often when I'm speaking to people, I will hear them regurgitate language that I've heard from a politician or a pundit or an internet preacher. And it's not rooted in love per se. It's just something that has been forming them and forming the way that they think. The average person, I wrote about this in the book, the average person spends 2 to 4 hours a day on social media. And 2 of those hours tend to be on Facebook. And I think that we have to recognize any amount of time that you're spending. And most adults are not talking to people 2 to 4 hours a day, much less, all of this is forming us. It's shaping the way that we think. It's shaping the way we look at the world. And the algorithm loves to go, hey, look what she likes, or look what he likes, and just start feeding that. So then you are creating, even accidentally, unintentionally, this sort of echo chamber or this sort of feed that is reaffirming all the things that you think, instead of actually broadening you or opening you up to go, wow, that is how I believe the world is. But what if somebody who came up in a different lifestyle, a different city, a different family of origin, a different ethnicity, a different gender, what they see the world so differently than me, and we don't leave room for that anymore. Because again, we've been formed daily by the news media, by social media, by all these different things, not by books, not by the Bible, not by conversations with other adults that are sharpening and shaping us. And if you are in a faith community, that's like an hour a week, maybe 2, if you've got a long service, like maybe 2 hours. It's not enough to form you spiritually. And I think that many people are learning their discourse from all these, quippy little things that work on the internet, but they do not work in real life. And they do not allow your relationships to flourish. And they do not invite love. And they do not invite welcome. And they do not invite reciprocity and vulnerability and connection. And so I'm grieved about this. And I want us to find a way to kind of turn off the noise and reconnect again, and save space for people to be who they are, and to have boundaries that enable us to go, hey, this is what I think, want, need, and feel. And that's what you think, want, need, and feel. And I'm going to leave room for that thing to be different. I'm not going to try to fix you or save you or convince you or advise you. I'm going to be here with you. And I think that's a better way to live.
I think there's this misconception that we have to convince people of what to think and believe. But I feel like Jesus, when I look at his life, he just showed up with people, and the way he lived won people over and made some people mad for sure. But I feel like, and he stood up for things that needed to be stood up for, and he had those hard conversations. He didn't sugarcoat things, but he also met the needs of people and spoke to them in love and taught. And I mean, whether you look at God in the Old Testament and the New, he's the same God as then as he is now. And I think we need to immerse ourselves in his word if we want to look more like him. If we're immersing ourselves in a news outlet 24/7 or on social media 24/7, and I do that. But I feel like when we immerse ourselves in God's word and just say, God, what is it that you want to show me from this? Not to prove my point, but just to show me who you are. I feel like that's what is really going to heal our nation and heal us as individuals. So
yeah, that's beautiful and well said. I think you're so right about that. And I think this idea of immersion is so beautiful, because there's also within that room for reflection and room for just being still. And I think that our minds are running all the time, and we've got a phone in front of us all the time. We've got work in front of us all the time. Most of us have gone through this pandemic, and, we're on screens even more than we normally would be. And it's created maybe some habits that are not as healthy as maybe they need to be, in order for us to be more thoughtful and to slow down and not to be driven by anxiety, fear, and hurry. because these are the things that hinder us from noticing the world around us, from being a person of peace, from being someone who can slow down in the way we respond to others and think thoughtfully about what we want to say or type next. So we need this space. So your point on immersion is so beautiful because, yes, God's word, but also God's spirit to be with him changes us. It's beautiful.
I do want to really just dive in your book. And I want to encourage, if you're watching this and this kind of spikes an interest in you, I would encourage you to pick up a copy of her book. And we, in there, she talks about cancel culture, justice, race, class, gender. She touches on all those heavy topics. And I feel like if we did talk about all of them here today, we'd be here forever. I really want to hone in on that conflict piece. How do we have conversations that, are generally conflict filled, but we need to find ways to resolve them. We can't run away from those we love because they disagree with us. And so I love how in your chapter, When Conflict Calls, you really talk about these ways to engage in conflict in a way that helps have thriving and healthy relationships. So would you maybe share some of those as well as some things to avoid?
Mm-hmm. So I think two attitudes are really necessary for a great starting point for conflict resolution or for having difficult conversations, and that is curiosity and humility. So I think humility will take time to listen. Humility is capable of suspending judgment. Humility is capable of listening well. And I think curiosity asks great questions. So instead of listening to respond, curiosity would invite us to say, hey, how did you arrive at that conclusion? Well, how did you get there? Can you walk me through how you landed on that conviction? Can you help me better understand the way that you're thinking about this issue? So when somebody has something different to say, or you can't, get on the same side of a problem, curiosity will help you get there. And that helps slow down, humility and curiosity slow down that process of elevating to accusation or blame and shame, or all the things that we're very tempted to do and come quite naturally to us, frankly. But curiosity and humility, asking great questions and staying humble, will help you listen and help you understand the other person's perspective. Communication is really all about understanding the other person. It's not about getting your point across. It's about arriving at a place of understanding. And so I talk a little bit about like the exact things you can walk through, everything from, praying first. And I'm not talking about being super spiritual and feeling like you have to have all the words. I'm talking about like, hey, this is about to get heated. God, help me, please. Thank you. Like it can just be the most simple prayer that will just help you. Hey, let me direct my attention to love, because right now my attention is on anger, or right now my attention's on frustration. Right now my attention's on annoyance, like whatever the things are. I want to control this situation. I would like to manipulate this person so that I can get my way, whatever each of us are tempted to do. But, that process of pausing and just saying, God, help, please, and thank you. Again, asking lots of great questions and thinking through what would it look like for me to be able to engage with this person in a really powerful way. And then things that you never do. I have a long list in the book, not too long. It's definitely something you can take on and adopt. And it will certainly help those of you who perhaps have been in abusive context, or you have been in workplaces where they did some of these things and you haven't known how to react, or you just completely shut down. So even if you are a person who's perpetuating these things, or you are a person that these things have happened to, I think they'll really help you. Things like avoiding name calling. Like we should just never be calling names in the middle of a conflict, especially as an adult. It's like we've got to get a hold of ourselves. There is no reason or excuse for name calling. There's no reason for cursing at people. Again, I'm not a Christian who's really hung up on cuss words, so I'm not talking about that. But what I am talking about is there's no need to cuss at people in the middle of a conflict, because it just escalates everything, or it shuts somebody down. And that can be a really, name calling and cussing at people can be a way of controlling the other person and bullying them into shutting down or escalating, because maybe you have that little dance that you do. So things like that. A threatening abandonment is another one to just never do. It's like, hey, if you don't have this conversation with me, or if you walk away right now, here's what I'm going to do. And you threaten to leave them. If you're married, you threaten to divorce them, or you threaten to harm yourself. These are all red flags and things that are just actually never okay in a conflict. I also want to encourage people that when you're in a conflict, many of us think like, hey, a certain personality type is better at this. People who are more direct, or they're more candid, or they talk more, they're the ones who are really good at conflict. And I just want to remind everybody that conflict doesn't have a personality style, that you can actually be a shy, thoughtful person and be excellent at conflict resolution. And so it doesn't look like a big talker or someone who always has the right words. Healthy conflict looks like a person who knows how to engage and communicate and connect. So conflict takes a great deal of vulnerability. So if you're aggressive, or you sweep things under the rug and don't talk about them, like, these are the opposite ends of the spectrum. But both of those people are avoiding the real intimacy and connection that comes from actually engaging in conflict in a healthy way. And so I just want to encourage you, if you feel a little more shy or you need space to process. I'm an internal processor, man. I do not talk to figure out what I want to say. I need to think and be reflective. And so I've had very often in conflicts at work, or, at home, I've had to, or with friends, I've had to say, hey, you know what, actually what I would love is just, I need a few minutes to process my thoughts. Can I really think about what you've just said? And then I want to respond more thoughtfully. Or I need a break right now. I've realized if I keep going like this, I'm either going to completely shut down, or I'm going to say something that I deeply regret and don't mean. So I actually need a break. Can we walk away from this and we can come back in an hour, or we can come back tomorrow and have this conversation when we both had a little bit of space? So don't be afraid to ask for what you need in conflict too. I think that's why a lot of people don't engage in it, because they think that they have to have all the right words, and they think that they have to do it all the right way. And they think that if they don't, resolve it all right then, that it wasn't a good conflict resolution. As a matter of fact, most conflicts take more than one conversation. So I've said a lot, but these are some examples of some things that are in that chapter.
I want to say I also loved how you shared about fight, flight, or freeze, and fawn can also be another one as well. It's interesting to see how each individual kind of does that differently, does conflict differently. And so maybe if you could explain a little bit about what that looks like.
I'd love to. So fight, flight, and freeze. I learned about this because I was a major stonewaller and I was trying to figure out what was going on with me in conflict. So here's what's interesting about fight, flight, and freeze. I'll explain them in a second, but we all are a combination of all of them. So for example, I am so unafraid of conflict everywhere except for with my closest relationships. Like, I don't mind. I can have a conflict at work. I can have a direct conversation in my faith community, moms at the park, at my son's school. I've got no problem with advocacy. I'm like, let's go. No problem. You want to go toe to toe? I'm here for it. Like, let's work it out. Let's hammer it down. Let's go. And then at home, the closer I am to you, the less likely I am to engage in conflict, the less likely I am to want to go toe to toe about anything. I am way more tempted to sweep things under the rug or go through the motions and not address the elephant that's in the room. And so I want everybody to know that in any given situation, based on our past experiences, maybe the trauma that we've experienced, that we could respond in one of these ways based on the relationship and the connection points in that relationship. Because some people love to fight at home and couldn't fight at work if God paid them $1 million to do it, So fight, flight, and freeze. The fight response is the one who, when there's a conflict, when there's a trigger, like immediately you're ready to fight. Like, you just amp up, you're ready to go. You've got great responses. You're in the moment. Let's go. Flight response. This is the one that I have when I feel helpless. So sometimes if things are going off the rails with my kids at home, I'm like, everybody in the car, we're going to the Starbucks drive-thru. Like, I just need to fly out. Let's go. So flight tends to find a way to leave the situation. And freeze, which could potentially be the most dangerous one, because what happens with freeze is not that you stand still like a deer in headlights, but freeze is the one who there is a major conflict brewing. And there's a major pain point inside. And there's this big rock that they're sitting on, but they keep going through the motions. They keep, connecting in relationship, but not really. They're not being as vulnerable, but they're present. They're there. You wouldn't really know there's a problem unless you started asking different questions or hunting down the problem. That's why very often in marriages, you might see somebody just like walked away. Like, there was no real warning signs that anybody could particularly put their finger on, but somebody just is like, I'm out. That's a freeze response, because they've been out for a long time without communicating that they've been out. And that can happen on a job. That can happen in a faith community. That can happen in a friendship. So freeze could potentially be the most dangerous one, because they're out of touch with their body and their feelings. And so because of that, they have a very difficult time communicating what's happening on the inside of them. So that's fight, flight, and freeze. And again, we're all a combination of these things given the situation we're in.
Right now, we're heading into the holiday season, so we're going to be seeing a lot of our family members that we probably, some agree with, some we don't agree with. And so I'm kind of throwing this question at you kind of unexpectedly, but what would you suggest for someone that maybe they're coming into a conversation where the other person is not engaging with these tactics, right? Where maybe it has gotten super escalated and, as a person, you're trying to do all these things, but the other person is not. Do you press pause on the conversation? You may not see them again for another year. It may fracture a family relationship indefinitely. How do you navigate that when there isn't reconciliation or respect?
Thank you for asking that question. Every situation is different, of course. But one of the things I recommend to people, and maybe it's an unpopular opinion, but I think that, there are other ways to relate to people besides what you would disagree on. There are other ways to relate to people besides the trauma and bad experiences and negativity and toxicity that might be present in that relationship. And so for me, with the people that I'm only going to see once a year, or the people that I feel like, gosh, I'm a little bit dreading this. I'm nervous what they're going to say at the table. I'm nervous how they're going to behave in my kids. I don't know what they're going to bring up. I don't know what's going to happen. I can't control any of that. So I try to spend less time focusing my energy and worrying about what I can't control and more time thinking about how do I want to relate to this person. So perhaps I'm going to talk to them about movies and I'm going to relate to them about their job. I'm going to talk to them about the art that they love to create. I'm going to ask them about the TV shows they've been watching on Netflix. It's going to be lighter. It's going to be more full. And if they start to go there, maybe they just start, poking the bear and that thing is about to rise up inside you because this is what always happens. That's when I just switch gears. Like, wait a minute, I'm gonna go get round 2 of turkey and stuffing at the table. I'm gonna just go to the restroom real quick. You know what? I'm gonna step outside for a few minutes, like either walk away or redirect. Don't engage. You don't have to go to every fight you've been invited to. I think I saw that on Pinterest or somewhere, but it's true. It's like you don't have to say yes to everybody's invitation to bait you. So I think, can you fly a little higher? And can you relate to people not just with the pain that you've experienced in that relationship or the negativity or the disagreement, but can you actually just relate to them about things that have nothing to do with those? And I think that actually helps stabilize the relationship, makes you feel more safe and secure. And I also, at the holidays, I love to give people freedom to just not go places. Who told you you had to always go there? Are they going to be mad if you say no? Yes. But if you don't want to go, and it's the most painful thing in your life all year, and you dread it so much it makes you sick with anxiety, why are you still going? You are grown. You can say no. You can make a different decision, or you can go for 1 hour instead of 5. Like you can show your face and you can leave. And I've practiced all of these things and they're very, very helpful. I think my one thing I would say is when people make certain comments at the table, if they make a racist comment, if they make a sexist comment, if they use language that I feel is inappropriate, I think it's okay to address those things. It doesn't have to be a big drama, but it's just like, hey, when you said that, that's really actually hurtful to me. And I'd appreciate if you wouldn't talk that way in front of me or in front of my kids. And you just have to be a grown up and do it. But otherwise, I think just relating to people, outside of the pain points is an okay thing to do.
I think those are really important tips. And I think something that we all really need to hear right now. And I think just the idea of like, hey, let's just engage in loving the people that we love and not having to just only talk about politics or only talk about contentious topics, but just love the people that we love. I mean, it shouldn't be so complicated. So I think that those are really great tips. And I just appreciate you sharing this with us. Before we wrap up, do you have anything else that you would like to share?
I'm really grateful you're having these conversations. And I know for all of you listening and watching, I know that these are sensitive topics, that these are difficult topics, but I feel like my encouragement to you is that we have so much hope and that change is really possible, that you don't have to live feeling like your whole life is in conflict or you have to avoid things or that you can't be direct and candid and kind. Like you can actually learn the communication skills that you need. And to me, that is a great and rich encouragement. No one is born a master communicator. No one is just born knowing how to do conflict well, but these are skills that we grow in. And so I just encourage you to keep going and to have hope.
I just want to encourage whoever's watching this. Like, we talked about the fruit of the Spirit a few weeks ago, and I really wholeheartedly believe that if we ask God to show up and for the Holy Spirit to fill us in those moments, like, He will show up. There's like the Holy Spirit activate thing that's going around right now.
I love that reel.
And I think we really need it, especially in conversations like this. And so I just appreciate, seriously, Ashley, for your time, just showing up and sharing about this heavier topic so that we can be able to walk into our holidays in ways that we can have honest and real, but also loving conversations. So thank you so much. How can we follow you going forward, and where can we find a copy of your book?
Yay. So you can buy the book anywhere it's sold. Amazon, you could buy it Target online, you could do Barnes and Nobles, wherever you'd like to purchase your books, you can get it. And then I spend most of my time on Instagram at Ash Abercrombie, and then ashabercrombie.org is my website where there's YouVersion Bible studies and lots of fun things over there that you could, download or get or read or watch. And it's just been my pleasure to connect with you, Melissa, and I look forward to seeing this episode. It's going to be awesome.
Well, thank you everyone for sticking with us. I know it's been a heavy topic, but I'm so expectant of the conversations that we're going to be having with our loved ones over this holiday season. So I will see you back here next week.